The scent of roasting boar and pine smoke clogged the air, a thick, celebratory blanket that did nothing to soothe the frantic tremor in Alara's hands. Around her, the silver moon pack thrummed with a collective energy she could taste on her tongue, a metallic tang of anxiety, awe, and raw, primal excitement. The Alpha King was coming. For Alara, who had spent the last 6 months trying to shrink into nothingness, the arrival of the ultimate Alpha was a personal vision of hell. She kept her head down, her focus trained on the rough-hewn wooden spoon in her grip, stirring a pot of stew that had long since stopped needing it. The kitchens were her sanctuary, a place of steam and repetitive tasks where no one looked too closely at the quiet, skittish Omega, who had washed up on their territory's edge, half-starved and haunted. "Can you believe it?" Lena, a broad-shouldered beater with a perpetually kind smile, whispered beside her, wiping her hands on her apron. "Kaelin the Unbroken. Here. In our great hall." Alara offered a tight, non-committal hum. She didn't want to think about him. An Alpha's power was a physical weight, a pressure against the back of her neck that she'd learned to associate with pain. The Alpha King's power, she imagined, would be a mountain. Crushing. A great roar went up from the hall beyond the kitchen doors, a wave of sound that vibrated through the stone floor and up Alara's legs. He was here. Her stomach coiled into a knot of ice. Stay small. Stay silent. Invisible. It was the mantra that had kept her alive in the Blackwood Pack, under an Alpha whose cruelty was a form of art. But the past had sharp teeth. The roar of the crowd, the sudden surge of feral energy, it was too much like the nights of forced celebration in her old pack, the ones that always ended in someone getting hurt. Her breath hitched. The spoon clattered from her numb fingers into the stew. Her head snapped up, her gaze darting toward the archway leading to the hall, a cornered animal searching for the threat. And she saw him. He stood framed in the massive doorway, a giant of a man whose presence eclipsed everyone around him. The Alpha King. He was not just powerful, he was power, a living storm of authority and ancient strength that made the air itself seem to bend to his will. The entire hall, hundreds of wolves, were bowed before him. Every head was lowered, every neck exposed in a gesture of absolute submission. Except for hers. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. Her training, her survival instinct, screamed at her to look away, to drop her gaze, to cower. But a different instinct, one she had suppressed for so long it felt like a ghost, rose up in defiance. It was a primal, protective thing, a shield against the crushing weight of his dominance. It flared behind her eyes, hot and silver. Across the vast, crowded space, his head lifted. His gaze swept the room, a king surveying his domain, until it snagged on the one point of resistance. On her. His eyes, the color of molten gold, narrowed. They held none of the sneering cruelty she expected, none of the rage at her insolence. Instead, they held a flicker of shock, a deep, unsettling curiosity. Every wolf in the world submitted to the presence of the Alpha King. Their instincts demanded it. But Alara's gaze, filled with a terrified, unintentional power of its own, met his. And held. The world seemed to fall away, the roar of the crowd fading to a dull hum. There was only the silent, crackling line of tension between the Omega in the kitchens and the king in the hall. He did not look away. He didn't overpower her. He simply held her gaze, as if he'd found something impossible, something he'd been searching for without even knowing it. A low growl rumbled in Kaelin's chest, a sound felt more than heard, a vibration that resonated deep in Alara's bones. It wasn't a threat. It was recognition. And in that moment, Alara knew her 6 months of peaceful invisibility were over. The silence in Kaelin's wake was a living thing. As he moved through the hall, the sea of bowed heads parted for him, but his golden gaze never left Alara. He walked with a predator's grace, each step deliberate, eating up the distance between them. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. "Look down, you fool, look down." Her mind screamed, but her body was frozen, locked in that silent, impossible standoff. Alpha Daemon of the Silver Moon Pack, a strong and usually composed leader, scurried at Kaelin's side, his face pale with alarm. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice strained, "forgive the discourtesy. She's a refugee, new to our ways, she doesn't." Kaelin lifted a hand, silencing him without a glance. His focus was absolute. He stopped a dozen feet from the kitchen archway, close enough now that Elara could see the flecks of amber in his eyes, the faint silver scars that traced the line of his jaw. The scent of him rolled off him in waves, ozone after a lightning strike, ancient forests, and something else, something uniquely his that called to the deepest, most broken parts of her. "Mate," a whisper in her soul sighed, and she flinched from the thought as if from a physical blow. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice was a low baritone, calm and clear, yet it carried across the now hushed hall, as if he'd spoken directly into every ear. Elara's throat was dust. Words wouldn't form. She could only stare, her own strange power a flickering shield against the sheer force of his will. He wasn't pushing, not like her old Alpha would have. He wasn't trying to break her. He was waiting. "She is Elara, Your Majesty," Alpha Daemon supplied, stepping forward slightly. From the Blackwood Pack." A flicker of something dark and dangerous crossed the king's face at the mention of Blackwood. His gaze intensified on Elara, no longer just curious, but sharp with assessment. He saw the faint tremor in her hands, the way she held herself as if expecting a blow. He saw the shadows in her eyes that had nothing to do with the light in the room. "Elara," he said, tasting the name. He took another step forward. The wolves of his personal guard tensed, but he paid them no mind. "Look at me." It was an absurd command. She was already looking at him, unable to look away. But the command was different. It wasn't about sight. It was about presence. He wanted her to face him, not just stare in frozen terror. And the power in his voice, while immense, held a strange thread of gentleness. It wasn't a command to bend her will, but an invitation to show it. Slowly, shakily, she straightened her spine. It was the most defiant act of her life. She lifted her chin, the movement small, but costing her everything. She met his gaze, and this time, it was a choice. The flickering energy behind her eyes steadied, a silent declaration, "I am still here." A slow, wolfish smile touched Kaelin's lips. It wasn't cruel. It was fascinated. "The Omegas of Blackwood are not known for their defiance," he mused, his voice dropping lower, "for her alone. Lord Valerus assured me they were all properly broken." The name Valerus sent a fresh spike of ice through her veins. One of her old Alpha's closest allies. A frequent, sneering visitor to their personal hell. "I am not broken," she whispered, the words raw and torn from her throat. The king's smile faded, replaced by an expression of profound gravity. He saw the truth of her words, and the cost of them. He nodded slowly. "No," he agreed. "You are not." He turned his head slightly, his voice ringing out with indisputable authority. "She is under my protection. She will be quartered with my retinue. I want to know everything about the Omega, who does not bow." Panic, sharp and absolute, seized Elara. No. Not again. Not under the authority of another Alpha, no matter how different he seemed. It was a gilded cage, and she knew how quickly the gold could turn to iron bars. But as his guards moved forward, their expressions impassive, she knew she had no choice. She had held the king's gaze, and in doing so, had bound her fate to his. The rooms assigned to the Alpha King's retinue were opulent, a world away from Elara's small, sparse cot in the Omega quarters. Silken tapestries depicted ancient hunts, and a fire roared in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the polished wood floors. It should have felt warm, but to Alara, it was a prison. She stood in the center of the main sitting area, arms wrapped around herself, a lone piece of driftwood in a vast, indifferent ocean. Kaelin had dismissed his guards, leaving the two of them alone. The silence was thick with unspoken questions. He hadn't approached her, instead moving to stand by the fire, his broad back to her. The sheer size of him was intimidating, a physical reminder of the power he held. "You fear me," he stated. It wasn't a question. "I fear alphas," she corrected, her voice barely a whisper. He turned, his golden eyes pinning her in place. "I am not the alpha of Blackwood. You are the king of all alphas. The power is the same. It's just, more." Her gaze dropped to the floor, the old habit of submission warring with the new, terrifying instinct to stand her ground. "Invisible. Small. Is it?" he asked, his tone laced with a strange, considering quality. "When you look at me, Alara, what do you feel?" She risked a glance up at him. "Pressure. Like the sky is about to fall. And yet, you do not fall. You push back." He took a step toward her, then another, his movements slow, deliberate, giving her ample time to retreat. She stood her ground, trembling. "That power in your eyes. I have felt nothing like it. It is not an attack. It is a shield. An absolute, unbreakable defense. Where did you get it?" "I don't know," she lied, the words tasting like ash. She knew. It was the thing that had made Alpha Goran of Blackwood both covet and despise her. He'd wanted to weaponize it, to turn her into his tool for dominating other packs. When she'd resisted, he'd tried to beat it out of her. Kaelin stopped just out of arm's reach. The air between them crackled. The mate bond, a concept she'd always dismissed as a romantic fantasy, was a living current pulling her toward him, even as her mind screamed in protest. "It is a rare gift," he said softly. "An omega with the gaze of a queen. In all my years, I have only read of it in the oldest texts. A bloodline thought lost to time." Her blood ran cold. He knew. Or he suspected. "I am an omega," she insisted, the words a desperate prayer. To be anything else, to be special, was to be a target. "Are you?" He tilted his head. "An omega's instinct is to submit, to soothe, to yield. Your every instinct is to resist. To hold your ground. To meet power with power." He gestured to a chair near the fire. "Sit. I will not harm you. I swear it on my crown." The oath was absolute, the most sacred vow an Alpha King could make. Reluctantly, her legs shaking, she moved to the chair and perched on the very edge, ready to bolt. He didn't sit, instead leaning against the mantelpiece, a study in contained force. The Blackwood Pack has been a festering wound on these lands for a generation. Their alpha, Goran, was a brute, but he was cunning. He paid his tithes, he bent the knee when required, and his closest ally, Lord Valerus, sits on my own council and sings his praises. His eyes hardened. "Valerus is the one who told me the pack was strong, their omega's content." Alara flinched. Valerus. His sneering face swam in her memory. He had watched her punishments with a connoisseur's interest. "He lied," she whispered. "I know," Kaelin said, his voice a low growl. "I see the truth in your eyes. And I feel it in here." He touched his chest, right over his heart. "This connection between us, it does not lie. Tell me what happened there. Tell me what he did to you." The request was gentle, but it felt like a demand to rip open her own chest and show him the mangled, scarred tissue of her past. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot with shame and fury. "Why?" she choked out. "So you can pity me. So you can understand your new project." Pain flashed in his eyes, so raw and real it startled her. "No," he said, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. So I can burn them to the ground for it. The sheer, protective rage in his tone stunned her into silence. It was the opposite of everything she had ever known from an alpha. Goran's rage was for his own gratification. Kaelin's, it was for her. He wasn't looking at her like a prize or a tool. He was looking at her like she was something precious that had been desecrated. And in that moment, a tiny, fragile seed of trust, something she thought had died in her long ago, tentatively began to sprout in the barren landscape of her heart. The days that followed were a strange torment. Elara was a ghost in the king's shadow, forced into a proximity that was both terrifying and addictively reassuring. He made her eat with him at his private table, a public declaration that set the entire Silvermoon pack buzzing. Wolves who had barely noticed her before now watched her with a mixture of fear and awe. She hated the attention, but she couldn't deny the shield his presence provided. No one dared to even look at her unkindly. Their evenings fell into a tense routine. They would sit in the firelit room, and he would try to make her talk. Not just about Blackwood, but about her power. "It is not a weapon," he told her one night, his voice patient as she stared into the flames, refusing to meet his eyes. "It is a voice. The voice of your bloodline. You have just never been taught the language." "Goran tried to teach me," she retorted, bitterness sharpening her words. "He wanted me to make his rivals kneel. When I couldn't, or wouldn't, he had other methods of instruction." She hugged her arms tighter, the phantom ache of old bruises surfacing. Kaelin's jaw clenched, the muscle feathering in anger. He rose and paced the room, the contained energy rolling off him making her skin prickle. He was a fool. He tried to use a key as a hammer. "Your gift is not for dominance, Elara. It is for truth." For balance, he stopped in front of her. "Try it. On me." Her head shot up, her eyes wide with alarm. "No. I am the only wolf you will ever meet who can withstand it. I am the only one who can help you learn to control it. You cannot spend the rest of your life afraid of your own reflection." His voice was firm, but not unkind. "Look at me. And don't just shield yourself. Push." Hesitantly, she met his gaze. The golden eyes were steady, waiting. She remembered the terror of Goran's training yard, the pain that followed her failures. But Kaelin wasn't Goran. He stood before her, open, vulnerable in a way no alpha ever had been. Taking a shaky breath, she focused. She let that coiled energy behind her eyes unfurl, not as a panicked shield, but as a directed current. She thought of his command, "Push," and aimed it at him. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, Kaelin's breath hitched. He took an involuntary step back, his eyes widening in shock. It was as if he'd walked into a solid wall of force. He wasn't compelled, he wasn't brought to his knees, but he was stopped. Halted completely by the sheer weight of her will. Elara gasped and immediately pulled back, the power vanishing as she dropped her gaze, horrified. "I'm sorry, I..." "Don't be," he breathed, a slow smile spreading across his face. He looked exhilarated, awestruck. "By the ancients, Elara. It's magnificent." He stepped forward again, his hand reaching out as if to touch her cheek before he seemed to remember himself and let it fall. "You see. It is not a thing of pain. It is a thing of power. Your power." A strange warmth bloomed in her chest, a flicker of pride she hadn't felt in years. He wasn't afraid of it. He wasn't trying to take it. He was celebrating it. Their tentative peace was shattered the next day. As Elara walked through a quieter corridor, a figure stepped from the shadows, blocking her path. Lord Valerus. He was handsome in a cruel, sharp-edged way, his smile a predator's baring of teeth. His scent was cloying, stale wine and a bitter ambition that reminded her viscerally of Blackwood. "The little Omega refugee," he purred, his eyes raking over her in a way that made her skin crawl. Quite the climb you've made. Warming the king's bed already. Get out of my way, she said, her voice low and trembling. He laughed, a short, ugly sound. I knew Goran never truly broke you. That stubborn streak. He should have just killed you. Would have been simpler. He took a step closer, invading her space. The king may be intrigued by his new pet, but his interest will fade. And when it does, I will be here. And you will find my methods of training are just as effective as Goran's. Perhaps more so. There are secrets you and I share, little bird. And they are best kept in their cage. The threat was unmistakable. He was silencing her. He was reminding her of her place. The old terror rose up, choking her. She felt small again, helpless. Her gaze dropped to the floor. She will not be speaking with you, Valerus. Kaelin's voice cut through the air like a blade. He appeared at the end of the corridor, his face a mask of cold fury. Valerus paled, his smug demeanor vanishing instantly. He spun around, bowing low. Your Majesty, I was just welcoming the lady. I heard what you were doing, Kaelin growled, stalking forward until he loomed over the other Alpha. The difference in their power was palpable. Valerus was a flickering candle next to Kaelin's inferno. You will not speak to her again. You will not look at her again. You will not even think her name. If I catch your scent anywhere near her, I will strip you of your title and your territory, and send you to the wastes with nothing but the fur on your back. Am I understood? Yes, Your Majesty, Valerus choked out, his head bowed so low his nose nearly touched the stone floor. Go? Valerus scrambled away like a kicked dog. Kaelin watched him go, his body radiating pure, lethal intent. Then, slowly, he turned back to Alara. The fury in his eyes softened as he took in her trembling form. He didn't move closer. He just stood there, a guardian at the end of the hall. He will not touch you, he said, his voice now gentle, a stark contrast to the rage he'd just unleashed. I told you I would protect you. I meant it. She looked up at him, at this impossible Alpha, who wielded his immense power not as a club to beat her down, but as a shield to keep her safe. The tears she'd been holding back finally fell, not from fear or shame, but from a profound, earth-shattering relief. And for the first time, when she looked at the Alpha King, she didn't see a threat. She saw a sanctuary.